The last person to see her alive was a gas station clerk outside Santa Fe, July 11th, 1996. She'd bought a map, a bottle of water, and a disposable camera, paid in cash, smiled. Then she said something that the clerk remembered years later. "If I miss the turnoff, I'll probably just keep driving." Her name was Helen Porter, 41 years old, a history teacher from San Diego. She'd taken a 2-week road trip through the Southwest before the new school year started. Her friends said it was typical of her, spontaneous but careful, the kind of woman who carried both a first aid kit and a poetry book in her glove compartment. The plan, according to the postcard she mailed to her sister, was to drive from Flagstaff to Taos, spend a night photographing the desert churches, then circle back through Santa Fe before heading home. But somewhere between Santa Fe and Taos, she vanished. The next morning, her sister called the motel where Helen was supposed to check in. No record of her arrival. By afternoon, state troopers were notified. A missing persons report was filed at 5:12 p.m. It was assumed to be a travel delay at first, flat tire, maybe a wrong turn. But when her gray 1993 Honda Accord didn't appear after 48 hours, the search began in earnest. Helicopters traced the highway, volunteers canvassed gas stations and rest stops. Nothing. Not a tire mark, not a receipt, not even a signal from her analog cell phone, which barely worked in the region's canyons. The desert, vast and silent, seemed to have swallowed her whole. Investigators focused on the high road to Taos, a narrow 2-lane route that wound through high desert mesas and pinon forests. It was beautiful and dangerous. Steep drop-offs, loose gravel shoulders, and no guardrails for long stretches. Rangers knew the road well. Once. Vehicles occasionally went off and weren't found until winter thaw, sometimes months later. But the weather that week had been clear. No storms, no flash floods, no skid marks near the cliffs. Troopers said it was like she'd driven off the edge of the world. Back home, Helen's disappearance stunned her community. She'd been the kind of teacher students didn't forget. Patient, curious, always quoting history at unexpected moments. One of her favorite lines from Herodotus became symbolic. Great deeds are usually born of great danger. Her colleagues wrote it on a banner that hung above her empty classroom that fall. In the first year after she vanished, tics trickled in, sightings in diners, a woman matching her description near Amarillo, a report of an abandoned car near Española that turned out to be unrelated. By the second year, even those stopped. Her family held a memorial in 1998, planting a sycamore tree outside her old high school. Her sister Rachel told reporters, "I can't bury her, but I can at least give her shade." The case file grew thick. Dozens of pages of false leads, theories that went nowhere. One detective, Sergeant Luis Ortega, refused to close it. He'd been a rookie when Helen disappeared and never forgot her photo. Short brown hair, soft eyes behind thin glasses, the kind of face that felt familiar even if you'd never met her. He kept the file in his desk long after the department archived it. Every few years, he'd revisit the area on his own time, driving the same roads she had. He'd pull over at mile markers, scanning slopes with binoculars, picturing where a car might fall unnoticed. But the land always won. Thousands of acres of scrub, cliffs, and arroyos that could hide anything. In 2003, an aerial survey for erosion control photographed a faint metallic glint near a dry wash 12 miles north of Shumayo. Investigators hiked out but found nothing, just fragments of fencing and beer cans. The case went dormant again. By 2010, Helen's story had become one of New Mexico's enduring mysteries. Online forums debated everything: abduction, voluntary disappearance, even UFO theories. Rachel stopped reading them. "They all forget she was real," she told a reporter. "She wasn't a mystery. She was my sister who loved bad coffee and long drives." Then time did what the desert couldn't. It wore things down. The search faded. The tree at the high school grew tall, and the land, patient as always, waited. In March 2023, a local metal detecting club from Albuquerque got permission to survey an old wagon trail near the same region Helen had vanished. They weren't looking for her, just relics. The area was rich with 19th century artifacts, bullets, and tools from frontier settlers. But on the third day, just before dusk, one of them, a retired postal worker named Ed Ramirez, heard his detector give a sharp triple tone. Not the long whine of iron, not the hollow pulse of aluminum. A clean, bright ping. He brushed aside dust and sagebrush, expecting an old coin. What he found instead stopped him cold. A rusted Honda keyring. The metal still faintly stamped with an H logo, attached to a corroded AAA tag with a number that began with 619, the San Diego area code. He called it in that night. When state police arrived the next morning, they confirmed the number on the tag matched an old AAA membership belonging to Helen Porter, active until 1996. The spot where Ed found the keys sat less than 100 yards from a narrow arroyo that hadn't been mapped on most public surveys. From above, it looked like flat ground. Up close, it was a 30-foot drop into a dry channel hidden by brush and sand. Within hours, search crews were back in the desert for the first time in 27 years. When the drone camera hovered over the arroyo that afternoon, the operator zoomed in and whispered, "Oh my God!" Half buried beneath sand and tumbleweed was the faint curve of a roof, gray metal dulled by decades of sun. The desert had kept its secret well. The first excavation began before sunrise. The desert was cold, blue light spreading across a plain that hadn't changed since the day Helen disappeared. Two sheriff's trucks idled at the rim of the arroyo, their headlights cutting narrow cones into the sand. A drone hovered silently above them, recording everything. After 27 years, the desert was finally ready to speak. Sergeant Luis Ortega stood at the edge, watching the crew mark grids with orange stakes. He was older now, gray hair, slower movements, but the same tired determination in his eyes. When the backhoe made its first scoop of dirt, he whispered under his breath, "Come on, Helen, let's bring you home." By mid-morning, the outline of a vehicle began to take shape. The roof was merely the same color as the surrounding earth, oxidized to matte silver. They worked slowly, brushing sand away by hand, preserving whatever was underneath. The first thing clearly visible was a faded California license plate, still bolted to the bumper. The numbers matched the registration from Helen's missing 1993 Honda Accord. The car was wedged nose first into the arroyo's wall, front wheels buried, rear tires jutting slightly upward. From above, it looked like it had driven off flat ground and simply dropped out of sight. The driver's door was closed, glass intact, windshield cracked, but still holding. One of the deputies knelt beside it, peering through the dust-caked window. "There's something inside," he said quietly. Ortega already knew. They cleared a path down the slope with shovels and ropes, then set up a winch to stabilize the frame. The air smelled like rust and sagebrush. When Ortega climbed down himself, he reached out and touched the hood, warm from the sun, trembling slightly from the weight of the machine above. "She's been here the whole time," he said. The first door opened with a low groan, metal separating from sand. Inside, everything was preserved in a still life of dust and silence. A purse on the passenger seat, a folded road map of New Mexico wedged into the dashboard vent, a disposable camera half buried under the seat, the ignition key still in place. There was no sign of struggle, no violence, no broken glass from outside. For a moment, the investigators just stood there, not out of fear, but respect. 27 years of searching, and here she was, right where she said she'd probably be if she missed the turnoff. Still driving, still moving forward, and then Nothing. When the coroner's team arrived, they documented everything with quiet efficiency. The remains were skeletal but complete, seatbelts still fastened. In her lap, beneath the collapsed steering wheel, lay the outline of a notebook. Its cover had worn to fabric, but the pages inside were sealed by time and dry air. They lifted it gently, placed it in a humidity container. One of the technicians whispered, "She wrote till the end." By noon, the site was closed to the public. Reporters gathered behind yellow tape at the ridge, their camera lenses glittering in the heat. Ortega faced them briefly, holding his hat in both hands. "We believe we've located the remains of Helen Porter, missing since 1996. Evidence suggests an accidental off-road descent. There are no indications of foul play." He paused, eyes scanning the horizon. Sometimes the land hides what it doesn't want to lose. As the tow crew prepared to extract the car, the wind picked up, sending small waves of dust swirling through the arroyo. For a moment, sunlight caught the windshield, reflecting like water. Ortega turned away, blinking hard. Back at the sheriff's office that evening, the evidence table looked like an altar. Purse, map, camera, notebook, wristwatch. The purse still held a small pack of gum, 3 pens, and a receipt from the gas station outside Santa Fe, the last proof of her journey. The map was creased and brittle, a faint circle drawn in red ink around a small detour off Highway 76. Next to it, a handwritten note, "Scenic view, sunset." She must have tried to find it, turned off the road, and never saw the drop. The disposable camera went to the lab. When the film was developed 2 days later, it revealed the final hours of her trip. Landscapes, sunlight slanting through canyon rock, her own hand reaching out of the car window to catch the wind. The last frame showed a dirt road narrowing toward the horizon. The timestamp read 6:32 p.m., just before dusk. She had taken a photo of the place where the pavement ended. The notebook was harder to decipher. Most of the writing was smudged, but the first legible page, dated July 11, 1996, began with, "I feel like I'm driving through the past. Every hill looks like a thought I forgot to finish." Later entries mentioned heat, exhaustion, and how beautiful the desert looked when the sun fell sideways across it. The last entry stopped mid-sentence. "The road looks strange here. I think I—" The pen line trailed off into nothing. She might have looked up midward and seen the sky drop away. When Ortega read it, he closed the notebook and set it down gently. "She wasn't lost," he said. "She was writing." The state lab confirmed that the car's position matched a known erosion collapse that had occurred in the late 90s. Back then, the arroyo was narrow and steep. After flash floods in 2002, it widened and filled with sediment, sealing the vehicle completely. Even aerial surveys missed it because the slope looked solid from above. In other words, Helen had driven straight into a blind spot of geography, an accident hidden by time itself. News spread fast. Local papers called it the Desert Classroom Mystery Solved. Former students wrote messages online, remembering her stories about ancient roads and forgotten travelers. One comment read, "She loved history because it reminded her that nothing really disappears, it just waits to be found." Rachel Porter flew from Oregon to Santa Fe for the identification. She stood beside the coroner's table for a long moment before touching the bracelet recovered from Helen's wrist. A small copper band etched with the Latin phrase, "Docendo decimus." By teaching, we learn. She smiled through tears. She even graded life with Latin, she said softly. That weekend, Ortega drove back to the site alone. The excavation was filled in, tire marks fading fast under the wind. He parked at the rim and watched dust swirl into the arroyo. Listening to the quiet hum of insects and distant thunder, he imagined her car there in 1996, headlights cutting through dusk, her radio playing something soft, maybe classical, maybe old country, the front tire catching the edge of the wash, the slow roll downward, the shock, then darkness, and silence for almost 3 decades. He took a small notebook from his pocket and wrote one line. She stopped where the land turned into memory. Then he closed it and left it wedged beneath a stone. In the months that followed, archaeologists and rescue experts studied the site as a model for how terrain can hide vehicles for decades. The discovery reshaped missing person searches across the state. They started cross-referencing erosion data and floodplain maps, finding other potential sink sites where cars might rest unseen. Helen Porter's name became shorthand for patience rewarded in training briefings. When Rachel received Helen's belongings, she refused to clean them. She framed the map exactly as it was, folds and all, hanging it above her desk. The keys, the same ones that had started the search again, sat in a glass case labeled Found March 2023. She said she liked hearing them jingle when the house shook from wind. It reminded her that things could still move after being still for so long. The final piece of evidence returned from forensics was the watch. The crystal was cracked, but when they opened the back to check for corrosion, the mechanism twitched once. Tiny gears moved, then stopped. A pulse, the technician said. Ortega took it as a sign. Sometimes even time starts over, he said. The case officially closed that summer. The paperwork used a single phrase under cause of death: accidental descent. But the story that passed through the town wasn't about accident. It was about how the desert had kept her safe, how a teacher who spent her life uncovering history became part of it. That fall, students from her old high school held a memorial class at the site. They brought notebooks and folding chairs, sitting in a half circle as the wind rose. Rachel stood before them, reading from Helen's last journal entry. She didn't vanish, Rachel said. She just went farther than we knew how to follow. When they left, one of the students slipped a small brass keychain onto a nearby branch, the kind teachers use for classroom cabinets. It caught the sunlight and flickered in the wind, a tiny beacon over the place where Helen had rested all those years. Before sunset, Ortega visited one last time. He picked up a handful of sand and let it fall through his fingers. The air carried the faint smell of rain. She made it home, he said, to no one, then turned back toward his car. Behind him, the arroyo glowed gold under the last light, as if the earth itself was closing a book after a long lesson. The final page still warm from her hand. Autumn came early that year, the kind that paints the New Mexico desert in colors people don't believe until they see it. Gold mesquite, rusted light, a sky so wide it could swallow memory whole. The arroyo where Helen's car had been found was quiet again. No tape, no equipment, just wind and the soft chatter of grass. But the land felt different, like it had exhaled after holding its breath for 27 years. Rachel returned one last time in October 2023. She parked near the marker the county had placed on the ridge, in memory of Helen Porter, 1955 to 1996. Found here, March 2023. The letters were small, understated, just the way her sister would have wanted. Rachel brought a chair, a thermos of coffee, and the classroom bell Helen used to ring before lectures. She set the bell on a rock and whispered, "Class dismissed, teach." The sound echoed down into the canyon, faint but certain. Across the state, people who had once sat in her classroom heard the news. Some were teachers themselves now, some parents, some long retired. They wrote letters to the local paper, describing her lessons, the way she turned dry history into living stories, the way she believed that everything lost could someday be found again. One of her former students wrote, "Mrs. Porter taught us to look closer. Turns out, the whole world finally did." When the recovered items went on temporary display at the New Mexico History Museum, the turnout surprised even the curators. A modest case held her notebook, the cracked watch, the faded map, and the rusted keys that had started it all. The small AAA tag with its worn numbers drew the most attention. People leaned close to the glass, trying to read the faint 619 prefix, as though it's still connected to a living phone number. One visitor said quietly, "That's what hope looks like when it rusts." The disposable camera prints were framed nearby. 10 photographs, each one perfectly ordinary. Sunlight through the windshield, a blue mailbox by the road, the shadow of her car stretching long across desert sand. The last one, the dirt road narrowing into orange dusk, hung in the center, enlarged so you could almost step into it. Underneath, a simple caption read, "She didn't get lost. She just kept going." For Ortega, the case had closed officially months ago, but in his mind, it hadn't finished telling him everything. He started spending weekends at a library in Santa Fe, digging through old maps of the area. He wanted to understand how the road had changed, how something so ordinary could hide a car for almost 3 decades. One night, while tracing a line on a 1990s survey chart, he realized the wash that swallowed her wasn't even labeled until 2003. Back then, it had been dry, shallow, forgettable. A land had shifted beneath her without anyone noticing. She didn't drive into danger, he said later. Danger moved under her. In November, the school district named a new learning center after her, the Helen Porter Memorial Library. At the dedication, a small crowd gathered, teachers, alumni, and local officials. Rachel stood by the entrance, wearing Helen's copper bracelet. The mayor read a statement. "She taught us that the past is not behind us, but beneath us. Sometimes it takes years to listen." Then the doors opened and sunlight poured across the shelves. Inside, a wall-sized photo showed Helen in her classroom, chalk in hand, mid-laugh. The plaque below read, "To the teacher who believed no story stays buried forever." Visitors signed a guest book at the exit, leaving messages like, "Thank you for still teaching us." By the end of the first week, the pages were full. Meanwhile, Ortega finally retired. On his last day, he cleaned out his desk, leaving only one thing inside, the small stone from the arroyo with the note he'd written. She stopped where the land turned into memory. He left it for whoever would sit at that desk next. His final report ended with a single line typed beneath the closing summary. Found, March 2023. Proof that the desert keeps its promises. That winter, rains came heavy across northern New Mexico. Flash floods cut new scars into the same canyons Helen once photographed. The arroyo widened again, washing away footprints, tire marks, even the outline of the recovery site. But the marker remained, bolted into the ridge. Each time the wind hit it right, it gave off a soft metallic hum, almost like a voice. When spring arrived, a small group of metal detector hobbyists, the same club that had found her keys, returned to the site. They wanted to see how it looked now. Ed Ramirez, the man who'd found the keyring, carried flowers. He planted them at the edge of the slope, just above where the car had rested. "She gave us back the meaning of what we do," he told a local reporter. "You spend years listening to static, and then one sound changes everything." He took out his detector again, sweeping slowly across the ridge more out of habit than hope. It chirped once, twice, then went quiet. He laughed. "No more secrets here," he said. He turned off the machine and looked across the horizon where heat shimmered like water. The air smelled of sage and rain. It's all hers now. Rachel's life changed quietly after the discovery. She began volunteering with a nonprofit that helps families of missing persons navigate old cold cases. "It's the waiting that breaks people," she'd tell them, "but the earth keeps things safe longer than we think." Sometimes she brought her sister's map to meetings, pointing to the circled red route. "She didn't vanish," Rachel would say. "She became part of the geography." One evening, she got a package in the mail from Ortega, his old field notebook. Inside was a Polaroid of the recovery site at sunset, taken the day they pulled the car out. On the back, he had written, "She made it home." Rachel kept it on her nightstand. Every morning, the rising sun hit the glossy surface just right, lighting the photo's edge in a band of gold. By late 2024, the desert began reclaiming everything again. The wind filled the arroyo with sand, smoothing its edges, softening the past. The keys, notebook, and watch remained in the museum, but the site itself was empty. No fences, no signs, just open land. Occasionally, hikers stumbled across the marker and stopped to rest there. Some left small tokens, pencils, erasers, apples, little things a teacher might have carried. Over time, the rock around the plaque grew scattered with offerings, like a quiet classroom that never truly emptied. One day, a thunderstorm rolled through the valley, lightning cracking across the mesa. The strike hit near the ridge, scattering dust and sparks. When it cleared, the metal plaque gleamed as if freshly polished. A ranger who inspected it later noticed that the screws had fused into the stone, impossible to remove. "Guess the desert wanted it to stay," he said. That summer, filmmakers used the story in a documentary series about lost travelers. The segment opened with the recovered photo, the road vanishing into orange light, and a narrator saying, "Some roads don't end, they just wait for us to find where they continue." The image of Helen's keys became the symbol of rediscovery, a reminder that the smallest sound, a metal ping under dirt, can open decades of silence. In Santa Fe, a small bench was added outside the museum exhibit. Its inscription read, "Sit, rest. Someone once stopped here too." Visitors often sat quietly for long stretches, staring at the keys inside the glass case, imagining the jingle they must have made when she set them down all those years ago. On the 28th anniversary of her disappearance, Rachel visited again. The desert was blooming, wildflowers filling the gullies, bees humming low over the sand. She walked to the marker and placed a small silver charm on top of it, a miniature book, open to blank pages. "There's always more to write," she said softly. Then she rang the bell one last time, the sound rolling across the valley like a final lesson. At sunset, the light hit the arroyo and turned it the color of old copper. A single gust lifted dust into a slow spiral, glittering in the air before falling still. From a distance, it looked like chalk dust on a blackboard, a teacher's hand finishing her sentence. That night, a storm swept over the mesa, thunder shaking the ground. When it passed, rainwater flowed gently down the same path where the car had once fallen, tracing its outline in silver. Locals said it looked like the earth drawing a circle around what it wanted to remember. By morning, the water was gone, but the shape remained, an indentation, like a signature. Somewhere deep beneath that soil, her tire tracks still slept, untouched by time. And if you stand at the edge, when the wind dies and the sun drops low, you can almost hear the faintest metallic rattle, the echo of keys turning once more, like a door unlocking, like time remembering its own promise.